Afternoon, everyone. I think we'll wait a few minutes just to let everyone get into the room. So probably about 1 or 2 minutes. I'll just check who's here. Welcome to all from across Africa and from in the rest of our partner countries. We're not starting yet. I should just confess that I'm sitting on a heater because it is extremely cold in Cape Town today. So wherever you are, if you have some warmth, be very privileged. We complain at other times that we have the sun, but not at the moment. Yunus, shall we start? What do you think?
Hi, Azim and everybody. Yeah, I think I think we're good to go, and we can just welcome people in the chat as they join.
Okay. So good afternoon in Cape Town terms. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. I am, if we're going to go according to titles, I'm Professor Azim Badruddin from the University of Cape Town. I am also the co-principal investigator on the project that we're going to discuss today, along with Dr. Yunus Umar, who should be around here somewhere. We also very ably assisted by our colleague and student Isha Dilraj, who's been in contact with all of you. So just in terms of introductions, and nowadays it's very important for me always to ask people how they are. We live in a world that is extremely tenuous and fragile at the moment, and especially in South Africa or Cape Town at the moment, we are losing family by the day, and so COVID has had an enormous impact on different communities across the world, but also in terms of our personal communities, it's hit us very hard. So it's always important to share with people that we live in a COVID world, and wherever you are, we hope you're taking care of yourselves. We hope that you are not having to go through enormous challenges. All we can do all the time is to offer prayers of safety, prayers of some kind of comfort, and prayers of good things moving forward. So I tend to do that a lot nowadays. I must admit, I'm very fragile as a human being. I fear that I myself will be dead tomorrow, and I'd like all of you to remember me as a person that cared about all of you. So it's also embedded in the, sorry, Yunus, is that you? Okay. So it's also embedded in the project itself. So what I'd like to do today is to welcome you to the Political Economy of Education Research Network, and to offer you insight as an information session, to offer you insight into what it is we are, and what we provide, and what we're trying to do as a peer network research collaboration. Perhaps I should introduce us to start off. What is the Peer Network? The Peer Network is a 3-year initiative funded by the GCRF in the UK and led by 4 universities, namely University of Sussex, Ulster University, Nazarbayev University in Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan, and then the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Those are the 4 partner universities in this particular project. Our focus is aimed at improving the quality of political economy analysis of education. And our focus is on how we partner with academics, policymakers, and practitioners in conflict-related countries. The big focus that we're interested in as stakeholders within these 4 different universities is our concern that until now, not enough discussions have happened around political economy analysis of education and how we use that particular lens to bring insight into conflict-related areas across the world. And what we have done in the project was identify 2 regions, the Africa region and the Central Asia region, as case studies of how to start thinking about embedding a different kind of political economy analysis of education into those particular regions. We're always concerned about this reliance on international consultants and that lack sensitivity to local history. And so our big push in this particular project is how we locate that within local context and allow local researchers and people that work in the region and on the region to offer insights into political economy analysis in those regions. So we acknowledge the tendency to ignore the impact that international agencies have had on national practices and policies, and the different political circumstances that operate in different parts of a country. In these analyses that international agencies tend to do, there's often a reluctance to raise critical questions about education provision because they seem to be too sensitive, or they may challenge the vested interest of these particular international agencies. These limit the potential of analysis to improve the planning and the development of socially just education systems. Another point that I'd like to make in relation to that is that our big focus in the project is how to think about the development of socially just education systems. So our core objective is to develop a critical and locally grounded approach to political economy analysis of education that helps national, regional, and global level policymakers and practitioners to make socially just decisions about how to invest in education that will benefit children in context of conflict and crisis. Our aim, particularly in this project, is to offer training for early career researchers that will inform and facilitate effective political economy analysis of education in their particular context. And as such, we will hold training sessions in 2 regions, Central Asia and Africa, aimed at developing conceptual and theoretical understandings of political economy analysis and training these early career researchers in the practical elements of applying for research funding. Now, what I'd like to start off with in terms of that is I am not, we are saying that our partners in various countries require training, but we do acknowledge that early career researchers, when they're engaged in this, there's a lot to do and a lot to engage with. And so by bringing people together, not in terms of training, but in terms of coming together and presenting literature and techniques and engaging in dialogue around those, we can assist early career researchers to have a better grip or grasp of what it is they would like to do in various countries. So why the question for us myself and Yunus in particular, when we came at thinking about political economy analysis in Africa, is what is the context of Africa? I mean, globally, sorry, Isha, you've gone too fast. Globally, there's lots of analyses of how political economy analysis can help. But in sub-Saharan Africa, we have perhaps the highest proportion of out-of-school children and we also have some of the poorest conflict-related countries in the world. I mean, we can speak about Ethiopia, Liberia, Sierra Leone. More recently, I mean, not more recently, but South Sudan is particularly struggling at the moment. Uganda, Zimbabwe at the moment is really struggling. And then also more seemingly settled spaces like Kenya and South Africa, we must acknowledge the high proportion of children struggling in schools in very conflict-affected contexts. So many of these countries receive significant investment around development assistance to education and from our Western donor countries. But we face challenges due to the different kinds of conflict. Issues like internal displacement, refugee populations moving, these are all just some of the dynamics of what happens in Africa. So our big interest is collectively how to engage, how to provide. The provision of education reveals a range of political economy challenges for education. And so to name a few, we are focused on things like inequitable distribution in different contexts, the impact of decentralization on privatization in Africa, on how education systems have unfolded in the past 10 years, the different roles of education reforms in the midst of conflict related to governance and accountability, teacher supply and redeployment, language policies and curriculum content. These are but some of the issues that that come with education reform, and we need to understand how they have unfolded over the past period in these different countries. The potential to recover, the potential for countries to recover from conflict is a big issue for us, because it's partly related to access to quality education for children and young people who face the challenge of rebuilding conflict-affected areas. Big focus on early career researchers is to start embedding an understanding, or not embedding, again, it's a very patronizing idea, but us coming together and embedding within the dialogue particular ideas about how we rebuild our societies, especially when we think about COVID and the bifurcation of the rich and the poor in huge ways. So our interest is on how we focus on the access to quality education. Now, is it through a public education system as we argue it should be? Or what are the alternatives that are starting to emerge, and how do we work and challenge some of those? So the rationale is that the political economy analysis of education policies and provision leads to conflict-sensitive education that is less likely to do harm and more likely to contribute to conflict transformation. It's consistent, of course, with the UN Secretary's report on peace building and sustaining peace of April 2018, where the emphasis was on the importance of preventative approaches and investing in basic services such as education, bringing humanitarian and development agencies together, and building effective and accountable institutions. At the same time, protecting human rights, promoting social cohesion and diversity, and moving towards sustainable energy, but also sustainable policies that can assist countries to be sustainable in the long term. This, of course, was before COVID actually hit, and before we actually were able to see the deterioration in huge ways of these kinds of initiatives in Africa. So our main concern as a research collaboration is with equity. We're interested in non-discrimination in education access, in the resources that is provided to learners, and in the how and in generating outcomes for different groups in society, particularly the marginalized and the disadvantaged. Our big concern is how we target these groups in terms of how in the long term the needs and the requirements of the marginalized and disadvantaged in different communities in Africa are bracketed, and we start focusing on generating outcomes for these particular groups. So what's our approach? In terms of what I've done thus far is to say what most of you already know about the peer network. I thought, however, that it is important to revisit it, because we would have new people in the conversation, but also to just remind ourselves about exactly what it is that we're doing. So in terms of moving forward, our peer network, as a network, the big project was less about the partners doing research and more about getting or facilitating partners in the various regions to do research. And our role is a facilitating role, where we bring people together, where we get access to some kind of funding, and we facilitate the actual doing of research in the two regions. So as part of that process, we have two parts. The first part is we are inviting applications for research and practice fellowships in the political economy of education from organizations, individual researchers based in conflict-affected contexts in Africa. These fellowships include participating in a structured political economy analysis focused training program. And in that program, you'll be joining a new cohort of researchers working on issues of education, conflict, and crisis through the development of a critical political economy lens that is part of the wider peer network. That's the first part of the process. In this fellowship, we aim to advance conceptual and theoretical understandings of the political economy analysis of education. And again, we provide training in the bracketed sense, where we, in terms of dialogue, and mentorship on how to apply for research funding. In terms of the dialogue, our first focus then is on two in-person workshops, and online mentoring, and the opportunity then to apply, that comes out of those workshops, to apply for development funding. In terms of the program, so that's the three stages. When people join the program, we first have 2 in-person workshops. We have online mentoring throughout the process for the various participants. And then the end product of that is we allow opportunities for people that are part of the process to apply for development funding, and we then provide support when we ask for expressions of interest in that funding. Once we award that funding, we then provide support for those individuals to do the research itself. So the starting point is that participants in the program must be available to attend the 2 workshops in November 2021 and in February 2022. For the Africa Hub, our focus is on having the workshops in Cape Town. Given COVID at the moment, I'll come back to this. Obviously, the challenge is how to hold the workshop November 2021. So the first workshop will be during the week of the 8th through 12th of November 2021. And the idea there is to bring colleagues from the different universities together, where we will provide materials and all the different products that we've worked on thus far on the project, we'll bring that to the workshop. We'll put, and what we call training, we'll provide training at the workshop for the early career researchers that have put themselves forward to be part of the workshop. Coming out of that workshop, within that workshop itself, our focus will be first on how to discuss political economy analysis and how to think through political economy analysis, which I will in a minute, or not in a minute, but at the end of this process, ask our colleagues in Sussex to speak to. With the idea that we generate ideas for different partners on what kind of work they would do in their respective countries. The second workshop then will bring these participants back into a space where we start discussing their ideas and what they are thinking of generating as a proposal to get the funding. We anticipate 16 participants for the workshop, excluding, of course, the partners from the various partner universities, and we'll provide funding for the in-person participation. That will be available. The intention is to fly people into Cape Town and then host them, accommodate them in the various spaces in Cape Town. We'll have a workshop over a particular period of time, probably 3 days, and we'll provide, of course, meals and subsistence for the duration of the workshops. Who's eligible to apply? Applications will be made via a research active organization. So if you are a university, a research institute, an NGO, a government department, people that work in community spaces, as long as you have some way of locating yourself in a research space to do a piece of research. All these different organizations who wish to nominate a member of staff to participate in the program. And of course, if you're individual researchers, you can apply directly to the peer team to discuss your eligibility. Nominees for the program will be early career researchers. We initially opened it up to a bigger group, but since then we have now said we're targeting early career researchers. We consider early career researchers to be those individuals that have less than 6 years of research experience, and with both academic and applied experience that would be guided. The durations, of course, will exclude any period of career break for family or health reasons. You can read it in the flyer. But we welcome applicants from a range of backgrounds and experience to contact us to discuss their suitability. There are also established academics that would be interested in, for the amounts available, to do a piece of research as a way of contributing to the debate. Applicants to the Africa Hub program can be focused on conflict-affected African countries. Some examples of which: South Africa, Zimbabwe, as I've mentioned, Uganda, South Sudan, Liberia, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, but also other countries in Africa. Applicants need to be located in the African continent, or, and I can confer with my colleagues around this, are doing research that is directly in Africa. But they would have to be from the African continent as well. Continent, sorry. So what's our application process? I'm sorry, it sounds, it's all very cumbersome, but it is an information session, I suppose. Today was our session where we offer interested applicants information about how to attend, how to go about engaging in the process moving forward. Coming out of today, our hope is that we get participants to apply, to offer expressions of interest, and so we will provide expression of interest forms to all applicants, whereby by the 20th of September they indicate their willingness to become part of the process. Now, remember, part of that process is to commit to attending the 2 research workshops, to commit to being part of online mentoring processes and being part of that online community that's tied to our partners. And then thirdly, to commit to want to develop a funding proposal in the future that allows you to do research in your various contexts. So that date we've already set as being the 20th of September. In the period 20th of September to the 30th of September, we will then look at those expressions of interest. Not only the Africa Hub individual, myself, Yunus and Isha, but also our partners at Ulster, University of Sussex, and at Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan. We'll inform successful applicants on the 30th or just after, and then with the idea of having a 5-week period whereby they can plan their participation in the first workshop. Our first workshop we've identified as being between the 8th and the 12th of November. As it stands, we much prefer the face-to-face engagement in Cape Town. However, based on what is happening, especially in South Africa at the moment with COVID, very much part of our daily realities, and our infections, I mean, it was 10,000 a day until a few days ago. It was 7,000 COVID infections yesterday. So we're not sure whether we are going to see a decline at the moment. So we will inform people about the whether it would be possible to have face-to-face by a given time. But if not, we'll certainly be doing that particular workshop online. By that time, after the workshop, the idea is that applicants then submit short abstracts on potential project ideas, and we'll then start giving feedback to possible participants as a way of generating a discussion moving towards the second workshop. In the week of the 10th of January 2022, we'll do online sessions to share ideas and work with the abstracts from the cohorts in the various hubs, with the idea that in February 2022, we'll have another 3-day workshop where we support participants in developing the abstracts into full research proposals. Again, this will depend on what the COVID experience is and whether we have to endure a fourth or fifth wave. UCT is certainly already putting plans in place whereby we have not discounted the idea of still teaching online in 2022. So it's a very real thought that we have at the moment. By the 11th of March 2022, we will be dispersing development funding awards to successful participants. Not dispersing, but we'll have awarded the development funding, and we'll then start discussions with participants on how that process can play itself out. And then between the 1st of April and September in 2022, we would expect people to have worked on these development grants. Development activities carried out in support of, here's another part that we perhaps will come out in the discussion. And also hoping that initially we'll be giving out small grants, but depending on what the funding mechanisms made available to us in 22 are, we will then we may then offer bigger grants. So participants will certainly, in becoming part of the program, initially will be about a smaller grant, but with the possibility of that growing into a bigger grant. Our interest in the project is how quantitative analysis of existing data help us see horizontal inequalities relevant to education inputs and resources and outcomes in different country contexts. We are interested in these kinds of projects that we want to have discussions around in an analysis of macro education reforms or policies in different countries that help us see how decentralization, privatization, teacher education policies, etc., impact on different groups and affect the conflict dynamics. We're also interested in how identity influences education provision, as well as the impact of language of instruction policies on conflict dynamics. Mainly, we're interested in the politicization of history and citizenship in Africa, and the importance of cultural diversity in the curriculum, as well as the influence of religious identity on education in different country contexts. Now, as such, the bigger project is focused on exploring participation in decision-making around allocation, use, and distribution of resources at all levels of education systems, where we focus on the control of education by non-state actors, as we're seeing currently in Africa, but certainly in South Africa at the moment, where non-state actors are playing an increasingly bigger role in education provision. Our focus is on an analysis of political control in different country contexts and how the administration of education is playing out in these spaces. And then lastly, maybe I should just note that one of our main goals in the PEER project is to have deep conversations about the legacies of conflict in the Africa region, but certainly also in the Central Asia region, and then to discuss how to address these conflicts for new generations to understand the issues within their respective societies. Our big push is to ask the three big questions. How does education address historical and contemporary justices that underpin conflict? How do debates on education contribute to approaches to development and capacities to transform? What kinds of political economy discussions do we need to have? And as such, our approach is to engage in meaningful dialogue with different stakeholders in the region. So perhaps the way to end, perhaps is the way I should have started, was to introduce the different partners. But why I did not do that was because as part of our question and answer session, I'd like to introduce Professor Mario Novelli from the University of Sussex, who's the principal, the co-principal investigator in the bigger project. Professor Kelly Shanks from the Ulster University, who is a co-principal investigator. Professor Noreen Durrani from Kazakhstan. Why do I always forget this? Nur Sultan, let me just say Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan, sorry, Nazarbayev University in Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan, as partners in the project whereby we approach whatever I've identified today in those different spaces. And the idea being that we generate not only context-focused understandings of political economy, but also in the online space, we start generating materials to have understandings of as it's emerging across the world. I'm very privileged to invite our partners to this conversation. Professor Novelli, Professor Durrani, and Professor Shanks, as a way of, when people ask questions, these are also the individuals that will answer some of those questions. Lastly, as part of the project, as I'd just like to say always thanks to the person that runs the entire project from in the background, and that is April Hope. Thank you, colleagues. Let's open for questions and answers.
Hi, Azim. We've got some questions in the chat. Perhaps you just want to check the chat, or shall I read out the questions for you?
If you can, please, Eunice.
Okay, the other idea is that if I can ask Angela James, would you like to pose your question here? You posed 3 really important questions that I think we want to address. Angela, if you want to unmute and go ahead.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm from the University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Education in Durban, South Africa, and thank you for the invitation. The Dean, Professor Msibi, asked me to please attend this meeting. The questions that I want to know, so I'm quite intrigued by this network and, you know, the rationale or the underpinnings with regard to this particular network. And I have read the goals that you're hoping to achieve, and it's quite interesting to see the diversity of people here. But I'm interested in, is it one person per university, and is it only from the education sector of a university? So therefore, the only universities that will be invited to this are those that have a school of education or faculty of education. That's one question. And then the other one was, how will the person be nominated? So if it's an early career researcher, how will they be nominated from the university? Is there a particular procedure that you would like the university to follow to nominate this type of person? Because I know in some of the other things we've done in the past, we have been asked for, okay, executive of the university must nominate, or what is required with that. And then the last one is it the early career researcher that must submit and not the university that submits the application? Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Shall we have more questions, Eunice, and then maybe we'll get something similar as well.
Azim, is it possible to do those 3 questions first? Because
Okay.
they may generate some more questions arising from that. If that's, if that's acceptable to all 4 of you.
I have an answer. Partly, Kelsey, you may want to help me out here in terms of our thinking. If I may say something and then you just correct me, I'm open to being corrected in what I say. The focus is not on universities per se. The focus is on the individuals, the early career researchers that are keen to be part of the process. The idea of locating them in universities or formal spaces is that's the easiest way in order to disperse money into different spaces. So the idea being that we are able to use the formal space as a way of dispersing the monies to these individuals. But I certainly don't think it's necessarily tied to one university. Different parts of the university career researchers can put in bids, and we can look at all of those bids and say which particular proposal works best for the project, and in which way we can assist that particular individual. The focus on education. Well, look, our project is a political economy analysis of education, but certainly it would need a education focus of some kind, but they don't have to come out of education, schools of education or faculties. And then our big focus, I think, at the end of the day, is on early career researchers. So the applications I suspect we to come via the early career researchers with the idea that they do have the support of the various formal spaces. I don't know if that actually answers the questions, but Kelsey, maybe you can help me out here.
Oh, I think you did. I just wanted to add that I believe that we're open beyond universities actually as well to NGOs and civil society with research. So not limited just to education departments, actually, you know, peace building, conflict studies. It's quite a broad remit, I think, that we come under. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Okay. Thank you.
Are we able to address the question of who actually submits the formal application? Is it the institution or the early career researcher?
Do you like? So I think we have said individual applications. If the applicant is within a university or an NGO or an organisation, we would like their organisation to submit documentation to show that they're happy for their employee to be part of this programme. But if they're individuals that aren't part of a wider organisation, we've also said we're happy to speak to them individually and see if we can do some matchmaking around that. So we're not being too restrictive to only have researchers that are in current employment.
Okay, thank you for that.
Great. Then we've got a question from Catherine Langsford. Catherine, do you want to unmute and pose the question yourself?
I can, yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. This is a really exciting opportunity. So I just wanted to ask, so in my case, I'm not located at a university, as in I'm not working there. So if I was to take part and eventually took on a project where funding would be given to carry out the project, how would that be managed? So would the funding be sent to me directly as an individual and I would use it, you know, within the project, or sort of what are the checks and balances really?
Would you like me to take that one, Nazim? Or yeah, so I think from the fund, so I kind of know the funding regulation backgrounds. That's a bit of my job on the project, so I'll just jump in. So no, we have to administer the money through an organisation from our side, but I don't think that should preclude you from applying. We might be able to do some matchmaking with organisations in the region and be able to actually find a way forward. And that's what we're hoping to do a little bit of for any promising applicants that aren't already attached to an organisation. So we're trying not to be too restricted there, but no, it does, the money itself has to be channeled through an organisation, which is a bit unfortunate.
Sorry, may I ask another question?
Of course, Angela.
Yeah, so sorry, I joined the meeting late. I was busy in another meeting and I have to hop out of here into another meeting as well that I'm chairing. But I just wanted to understand, where's the money coming from and what's the purpose of why at this time?
Well, firstly, the money is coming from the GCRF, the UKRI, but the GCRF. And it's an application that was done in 2019 already. So the project has been underway in a sense since early 2020. But there are different parts, of course, different parts of the unfolding of a project. And then also COVID has impacted on the project in a big way. Why at this time? Why political economy in the moment of 2019? Because I think education systems are increasingly moving towards far more financially constrained spaces, whereby the needs of the marginalized and the disadvantaged are increasingly fading from public view. And I think that is the biggest impetus for us re-looking at political economy of education as a way of reminding those in the know that these issues need to be taken quite seriously as we move forward. Else, the gap between the rich and the poor essentially is going to, I mean, it's already growing. It's already almost impossible to bridge. But we certainly need to claw back some ground in that debate.
Okay, thank you. I suppose the socio is also so important, and also the culturally relevant context. I mean, we can speak from our South African context and what we are going through presently. and the divides. I mean, they're just insurmountable, just thinking about them. And it's about the action ultimately, you know, action for sustainable living.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Azim, is it possible to ask Prof. Novelli to perhaps just talk a little bit about the kinds of position papers that have just been published at Sussex and the kind of ideas that underpin, you know, a response to the previous question?
Yeah, I'm happy to say something. Yeah, I think that the logic of the project and the logic of the work that many of us have been involved in now for maybe 2 decades is a kind of recognition that the field of education studies is often quite depoliticized and apolitical, and tries to present the picture often that education, if you get education policies right, these formulas will function in a range of places regardless of context. And I think there's a recognition both amongst researchers and critical researchers, but also aid agencies, development partners, that actually, however technically beautiful an education program might be, it often fails to deliver on the ground. And you know, they start to go back to arguments around this relationship between education as system and the broader society that it interacts with. And you know, we've been conscious of both ways of that, the way that society affects education and the way education affects society. And I think particularly in our project as well, we want to go beyond that analysis of aid agencies, which often stops or begins at the border of developing countries. And I think that what we want to open up also is to try to understand the political, economic logics of international actors and their interventions. And I don't think there's any better example of that than what's going on in Afghanistan as we speak. For the last 20 years, we've heard the rhetoric that the invasion of Afghanistan and the intervention in Afghanistan was about girls' lives and girls' education. But I think that, you know, many of us have been talking about this for the last 20 years, the way that education gets mobilized as a legitimation mechanism for international intervention, the way that education gets drawn upon. And I think that, you know, our interest in this research project is really to explore and unpack some of these global interrelationships and to try to understand the motivations and the practices and the effects of that on education systems, and to try to push back, if you like, to try to get a local analysis in different countries, in different regions, and to build up that capacity to push back a little bit from the international policy gurus that travel around the world giving policy advice. So I think that, you know, part of this, I mean, one experience I had is some years ago when I was working on a project in Lebanon. I was recruiting a researcher to carry out the research, and the international organization I was working with said, please don't recruit a Lebanese researcher for this research, because they'll be too politicized and too embedded in the country. We need an international one. And I think that our argument would be the total opposite, that people from those contexts can best understand the challenges and the issues, and that often these people get excluded from these international engagements. And so, you know, one of the ways to address that is to start to try to build supportive networks of Southern researchers that can start to develop both the confidence and the skills to try to engage with these issues. So it's, in a sense, we're hoping to do some modest rebalancing of the research field and to support young scholars in the way that this international architecture operates, in terms of research funding, in terms of consultancies, in terms of work, to try to support that. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
There's a space for reflective accounts evaluated.
Azim?
Thank you, Mario.
And thank you,
Yes.
Prof. Prof. Novelli. I just wanted to check, we have the Asian Hub PI with us, Professor Durrani. Perhaps, Noreen, if you could just speak to us for a second about the kind of collaborations across the two hubs, just for a minute or so that people get an idea that we just won't be speaking as Africans. We'll also be speaking across the hub at some point so that we get a cross-fertilization of ideas. Thanks, Prof. Durrani.
Thank you, Eunice. So within the Central Asian Hub, we are focusing on 4 countries, and these are all post-Soviet countries, have quite similar histories, but these are young nations, around 30 years old. So there are some important contrasts within the region relative to South Africa, but there are also some important similarities as well. So the region itself had a long history of imperialism, and then as part of the Soviet Union, issues of repression of religious identities or local identities, and subsuming all these identities into the larger narrative of the nation. In some ways, these Central Asian nations were seen by the Soviet state as underdeveloped. So the kind of colonization that African countries have experienced and the modernity projects legitimized by colonial experience, there are some similarities of that experience within the region. So, although these countries had stake in the Soviet state, were allowed to have their own national identity, nevertheless, important markers like religion had to be left behind at home, but they needed to be developed like African countries, which also meant forsaking their archaic religion, archaic culture, and practices, so on and so forth. There are some important contrasts in these countries and the region as a whole. In addition to the shared similarity, one other thing is that these are predominantly Muslim countries, and which was one of the reasons why they were seen as backward by the largely Russian state. Unlike educational access, which is a huge challenge in Africa, thanks to the legacy of Soviet Union, schooling is widely accessible, although in higher education, there are disparities apparent. However, the main marker of inequity in this context is actually the quality of education, what kind of quality education is available at the level of school, but also in higher education as well. So the different sectors of education, the region as a whole has been borrowing policies from the West, like decentralization, some of the issues that Azim highlighted, and some countries have to follow these from the West because they are aid dependent, but other countries which are not are still borrowing these policies just to modernize, to be seen as modern. So, there is this internal logic of coloniality, even though these countries were not colonized in the same way as African countries. So we have important similarities and contrasts, and as part of the peer network, there will be opportunities for researchers who we recruit through these workshops at some point to bring them together in a conversation and to see how similar issues play out differently and what solutions are being proposed by researchers at the local level in the two regions. Thank you, Yunus.
Thank you very much, Professor Durrani. I thought that was very informative and quite interesting and something to look forward to. Azim, over to you.
Do we have any more questions, Yunus? In the
Yeah, I
chat?
think there was a
I can't
question
see the chat.
here, which we are going to address in the, in correspondence with Isha, but this was about somebody who's not an African national, located in Japan, but doing research in Africa. And so I've encouraged, our colleague to correspond with Isha, but maybe we can just say something about that. I'm sure there are others in the meeting who don't hold an African passport as such, but are doing work in Africa. And, maybe Kelsey, Azim, Mario, you could just address that for a second or two.
I think I'll hand it back to Azim, but the idea originally was, as Mario quite rightly just pointed out, was to give priority to local national researchers from countries in Africa.
At the end of the day, that is our main priority, and especially given that we have a very tight budget in terms of funding that we have available, the preference would always be for people that are located in the continent. But let's start a conversation with the colleague as well.
Just to say, sorry, that we are a broader network, so obviously to contact and to be part of our broader network is obviously not a problem at all. Just for the fellowships, as I think we've got slightly more restricted criteria, but would absolutely welcome you to join the network and attend our events and connect that way.
If somebody, for example, is from a different country but is collaborating with other colleagues in African institutions, would that be part of the kind of thinking that the network would facilitate?
Again, absolutely. That would always be encouraged. I'm not sure how the money would work though. So the challenge always is the pots of money at the moment. We're starting off small. And so when you have that situation and you have partners across regions or across countries like that, then it's up to them to pitch the proposal and for us to look at the proposal keeping that in mind.
No, thanks, Azim, and thanks, Kelsey.
Any other questions in the chat, Yunus? Otherwise, we can ask for people to put their hands up as well.
I think we've worked through all the questions so far. I'm not sure if our colleague Yuri Hanada wants to pose the question in the chat. It was Yuri's question that I was addressing here in terms of her being in Japan at the moment. So I'm not sure if Yuri wants to raise something there, but I think we've gone through all the correspondence in the chat so far. There was a question from Otieno. Would we consider research from Rwanda? The answer is absolutely yes. And we'd welcome your expression of interest as we've posted in the chat. Outside of that, I think, Azim, we've covered what's in the chat thus far.
Okay. Colleagues, any other questions from the, in terms of just putting your hand up and asking the question? Anything else you need to know about in terms of information about the processes moving forward?
Azim, a question that we've addressed are people able to work across institutions in a kind of cross, let's say a university and NGO together as part of an expression of interest, for example? Maybe we can just address that as part of our thinking.
I would imagine so, as long as we have a formal partner, either the NGO or the university serving as the person who we disperse the money to. But certainly that's possible. Kelsey, am I correct when I say that? Yeah. Yes, Eunice.
No, thank you.
Okay, so I see a question. I see these questions flashing by, but I can't see the chat itself. Zahra McDonald asked the question, right, Eunice?
Yeah, Zahra, do you want to unmute and pose the question? I think Zahra probably wants us to ask the question. Zahra says, good afternoon to all of us and good afternoon to you too. What constitutes 6 years experience in relation to defining an early career?
Yeah. Look, what we're trying to do is to not is to give preference to those that are starting off their research careers. So that's the preference. So much like a postdoc creates a 5-year timeline. Our idea of 6 years was simply just to give some boundary to what we think of as early career researchers. Some people take 2 or 3 years off. Sometimes we may then look at looking at that application. But the idea was not to get established researchers pitching for the funds that have been located at universities for 10 years or etc., and have access to other pots of money. So that's the logic. So I don't think we're bound to the 6 years. We're not going to ask you for what day did you get your degree. The idea being just that that's the framework that we want to work within.
Thanks, Azim. Zahra says thanks from the chat. She had some background noise and therefore didn't ask the question herself. Okay, so unless I'm getting any other questions, perhaps we can get some, Kelsey, if you'd like to give, to say something to our audience as the co-principal investigator, and then Mario as well, in terms of just what it is we're trying to achieve, and you've spoken to that, but in terms of process itself.
I think Mario has very adequately sort of detailed the kind of thematic, what we're trying to achieve and where we're trying to go with that, and the level of sort of engagement with local researchers. I suppose I can just add in, as you mentioned in your presentation, Azim, just to reiterate, we're hoping to support local researchers to create a cohort, a network that work together, learn from each other across different country contexts and then across the different hubs, and support them with conducting a piece of research, with understanding how to apply more broadly to research funding beyond the typical funders they normally go to, and have more access to funding to build their own research careers, and become that kind of competitive researcher within this international market that is quite restrictive at the moment, which we see as kind of being quite an ethical issue. So yeah, it's really exciting to see so many people join the information meeting, and we're really excited to start receiving some expressions of interest and having a look.
Thank you, Kelsey. Mario, anything you would like to say to our audience?
No, just that, you know, for those people that haven't attended today, we're going to put this meeting online, I hope, and share it so that, you know, everybody's welcome to apply. And, you know, just to reinforce this idea that, you know, if I reflect on my own kind of career development, it's been those networks and support from colleagues, senior colleagues, junior colleagues, colleagues in different parts of the world that have facilitated the possibility to do different types of research. So the idea of the network and the fellowship is really to create a foundation that hopefully you can all use to build on in future relationships. So, it's a starting point rather than end point. It's a 1 year kind of process, but we hope that it's also a starting point for us to look at possibilities of developing relationships, developing long-term research projects together, supporting people's careers. So, we really feel strongly that this project and this network can do some of the supportive and caring kind of academia that often is absent these days in a highly competitive kind of neoliberal market where everybody's out for themselves. So hopefully through this we can create some kind of alternative process.
Thank you, Mario. And then, with regard to that, we've got 2 working papers like this that we've already put on our website. Substantial pieces of work where colleagues across the region can go to and start reading and start engaging. So part of our network is about providing materials that allow us to have a dialogue, an intellectual dialogue across space and time. So thank you, Mario. I was just wanted to highlight we have already 2 working papers on our website.
Yeah, I think three working papers are now available. So please do check on the website. I think they're linked on the front page, so they should be easy to find.
Noreen will be joining us. We were hoping that Noreen would be joining us in our November workshop, but that's of course based on whether the workshop is going to be online or face-to-face. But Kelsey, Mario, and Noreen, the whole idea is that there will be active workshops at various points and have us having those conversations.
Yeah, maybe it didn't come out clear enough in the presentation, but the 2 workshops, we're trying to, the November one to provide some foundation in the theories, politics, economics of education, the background to that, and the research that's been conducted so far in context of conflict, so that relationship between education and conflict, with the potential for you also to present your ideas in that initial workshop. And then in the second workshop, we really want to develop those skills of how do you analyze systems in context of conflict? What are the tools that are available to us? What are the practicalities of getting research funding? So, a real recognition that we need both theory, but also practice, and that those 2 will be tried to be developed in parallel across the whole of the year, but are quite visually demarcated in the 2 workshops, that we want to both have a critique, but also develop the practical skills to develop research proposals, etc.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Colleagues, anybody else would anybody else like to ask a question or say something? We live in a world where presenters get freaked out by silence, so you need to help us out here.
Yeah, I just want to thank our colleague Tom Salmon from Rhodes University and the Center for International Teacher Education at CPUT for posting the links to the GCRF websites and to the lecture series that was developed by Prof. Mario Novelli and the peer network. Thanks a lot, Tom, and thanks for joining us today.
And then last but not least, of course, Eunice, anything you'd like to add to our conversation? I think you've been helping in the background, but you are a co-principal investigator in the Africa Hub. And so I must apologize for hogging the limelight in a sense.
Thank you for doing all the work, Azim, along with everybody else. I think what we're all looking forward to is to learning from everyone. That's the key idea here. We live in a world that is chaotic. We live in a world where solutions are not working. and we need to apply our minds as fruitfully as possible alongside others, not to speak for, but to begin to learn with. And I think this particular project does exactly that in terms of its ideal. And so we look forward to making that happen and to learning much from everybody. Thanks, Azim and colleagues.
Yeah, I think let's end it there, if I may, and say thank you to colleagues. And end of, I thought I heard a voice, just in case anyone wants to say something. No. And then to say to colleagues to please keep safe. I would say please vaccinate, but apparently it's a politically challenging question nowadays. But from my point of view, I encourage people to vaccinate, because you're helping others in the world today by vaccinating. And please take care of yourselves. Hopefully, having watched soccer matches over the weekend and seeing those big audience, large groups of spectators, we're envious from our perspective. But it is a model of how we potentially can look in a year or two's time. So please take care and keep safe. Thank you very much all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.